Start, Jeff.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Julia.
Hello.
Is everyone in?
Yeah, everybody is in. Go ahead and get started. And if people join us later, I'll just keep letting them in.
All right, very
Thank you.
good. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second Michiganders for Civic Resilience Lunch and Learn. My name's Tanya Shootmaker. I am a former Republican senator, and I'm here with my good friend, former Democrat Senator Rebecca Warren. And we're so happy that you've joined us today. Together, Rebecca and I run Michiganders for Civic Resilience, and this series is dedicated to strengthening the civic fabric of our state. Michiganders for Civic Resilience was founded on a simple belief that Michigan is stronger when we listen to one another, with respect, and work together to solve the challenges we face, no matter what our differences are. These sessions are designed to be more than just discussions. They're opportunities to learn, to connect, and build practical tools for bridging divides in our communities, workplaces, and public life. As we get started, we invite you to bring curiosity, openness, and a willingness to engage thoughtfully. Whether you are here as a community leader, educator, public servant, or simply a concerned citizen, your voice and perspective are essential to this effort. Thank you for being part of this growing network of Michiganders committed to understanding, collaboration, and resilience. Together, we can model what civic renewal looks like right here in our great state of Michigan. We are fortunate to have wonderful partners in this cause. One of those partners is the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. With me today is Jeff Paulette, who is the director at the Ford Leadership Forum, and he will be introducing our amazing speaker today for today's Lunch and Learn. Jeff?
All right. Thank you, Tanya. I know it says Regan Van Dam on the screen, but if you can trust me, I'm not Regan, I'm Jeff. And it's really a pleasure for me to help co-sponsor this event at the Ford Presidential Foundation. We're very proud of our relationship with Michiganders for Civic Resilience and with the Carter Center, with whom we've partnered on this initiative. And I think our relationship with the Carter Center is an example of exactly what Tanya was just talking about, how people from different points of view can work civilly and cooperatively with one another and kindly. So grateful for this opportunity, and I'm just really grateful to introduce my friend Lexi Hudson. Lexi and I met, boy, a number of years ago, just briefly, and then when I moved over to the Ford Foundation, we reconnected because she was working at the time, working on her book, The Soul of Civility. She finished that book, and we've been able to reconnect a number of times since then. Just recently, down in her hometown of Indianapolis, part of a great event down there, Project Civility. And they got really incredible things going on down in Indianapolis. And the background to that whole project down there was Lexi's book, The Soul of Civility: Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves. And it's really a book of great learning, but also great wisdom. It doesn't just give us techniques for getting along better, but also to think about what kind of persons we are and what kind of persons we are in relationship to one another. So you're in for a real treat today. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Lexi and let her take over.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks to um, Tanya, Rebecca, Julie, the whole team for the gracious invitation. And I think the plan, I'll share a little bit of an overview of my work and my story, some of the core ideas from my book that I think could be particularly useful to you, especially maybe as we navigate and enter the holiday season. We have Thanksgiving just behind us. We have Christmas ahead, how to navigate the deep division that is, yes, defining our halls of power right now, whether it is our state legislatures or national legislatures, but also our family dinner tables. And that to me is the hidden crisis of our crisis of polarization, of division, of dehumanization is the tragic number of family relationships or lifelong friendships that have been strained or even severed outright over political difference. That's not the good life. That's not how it should be. So happy to talk about friendship and relationships with others that are too often being ended prematurely, which is not helping this crisis of loneliness and that we're living through. And I think it's difficult to talk about our crisis of division and dehumanization without talking about how we're lonely and we long to be seen and known and loved. And how can we each on this call, starting right after we get off this visit today, choosing to reclaim our agency, our civic power, and be part of the solution, right where we are, right at our family dinner tables, right in our communities, right in our workplaces, that we each have way more power to be part of the solution than we realize. That's a core theme of my work and my book, is that this crisis is far too important to be pointing fingers and blaming and waiting for this person to change. I had someone tell me just a few weeks ago, I shared with them a little bit about the exciting things that I'm working on that are happening, inspired by my book across the country. And I'm always brainstorming ways to support them. And, this person who I love basically said to me, Lexi, like, whatever you do, whatever anyone does, it's futile. As long as the person who's in the White House stays in the White House, there's never going to be civility in our world. And I said, that is exactly the attitude that I wrote my book to counter. That sort of fatalistic, pointing fingers, mentality that exonerates us from responsibility, but we each have way more power than we think. So, and then I think we'll open it up to questions. Maybe Tanya and Rebecca give a few questions, or Jeff, and then eager to hear from the audience as well. I think Julie put in the chat, please, as you're hearing things that are exciting you, inspiring you, challenging you, things that you disagree with, we'd love to hear all of them. I will tell you something funny. I don't know if any of you on this call have had a chance to look at my book, but I tell a joke in the introduction of my book. And this joke did not go over well with some readers. Here's what I say. I say, if you agree with what you read in this book, please do write to me. But if you disagree, do keep those thoughts to yourself. And I thought about putting a big fat smiley face next to it, or even like haha exclamation point, some sort of, emoji, something to make it obvious. And that just felt a little bit cringy. If you have to explain a joke, if you have to hang a lampshade on it, like, you destroy it. So I just left it dry. I left it, wry and I thought very funny and witty. And, of course, you would not believe how many messages I've gotten from people in the 2 and a bit years since my book came out saying, how could you write a book on civility and tell people who disagree with you not to write to you? And I said, it was just a joke, please do write to me. Of course, I want to hear from you if you disagree with me. So anyway, that's just a caveat to you, whether you've read the book or if you haven't yet, that is just a joke. I hope you just, take it in stride. It didn't land well with some readers. I wrote a piece not too long ago about the forgotten laugh. Like, have we become humorless as a society and lost the ability to see humor in ourselves and in others, and what the hidden costs of that are to a free and flourishing society. So I wrote that over at Civic Renaissance, which is my publication and newsletter dedicated to beauty, goodness, and truth, and reviving the wisdom of the past to help us lead better lives. So a bit about my story. I came to my interest in civility and honestly, my mother is called Judy the manners lady. She is this international expert on manners and etiquette, and she raised my brothers and I to mind our P's and Q's, how to set the table just so, how to shake hands and look people in the eye just so. And, Jeff knows me pretty well. This won't surprise him to know that I am constitutionally allergic to authority. I don't like rules. I don't like being told what to do. So when my mother told me to do something, I had to sit at the table, had to shake hands. I always wondered why, Mom, why do we do things the way that we do them? And I said to her, other cultures, they don't shake with a handshake, they bow. They don't greet each other with a handshake, they bow. Other cultures, they don't eat with forks and knives and sit at the table like we do. They use chopsticks or even their hands. Why do we do things the way that we do them? And I just always hungered for a philosophical, explanation and a reason, a justification for these norms that we just take for granted. And my mother, her answers never quite satisfied me. She said, "This is just the way we do it. So do it." And these questions always persisted. They lingered. And so I generally followed the rules of politeness and etiquette, and they worked well for me, as my mother promised they would. They led to success in work and school and life, and they worked until they didn't. I took a role in federal government 2017, 2018. I was at the United States Department of Education while Michigan's own Secretary DeVos was Secretary of the Department of Education. And it was a eye-opening experience, shall we say. It was a divided time. In Washington, the office was vicious and divided. And I saw these two extremes when I served in government. Um, on one hand, there were people who were hostile. There were people who had sharp elbows. They were willing to step on anyone to get ahead. And I knew to stay away from those people. On the other hand, there were people who were polished and poised and polite. And I thought they were my people. These are people that know the rules of etiquette. Maybe their moms were manners ladies too, but they knew the rules and these were my people. But, I quickly realized these were people who would smile and flatter me and others one moment and then stab us in the back the next. And that really threw me. Because one thing my mother had said to me growing up was that manners were important because they were outward expressions of our inward character. And yet here I was surrounded by people who were well-mannered, but were ruthless and cruel. And my experience in government led me to realize that the true crisis of our time is not a crisis of a lack of manners and decorum, that it's a crisis of dehumanization. That is the true crisis underlying our crisis of civility, that we insufficiently appreciate the gift of being human in ourselves and in others. And I saw this in the two extremes that I experienced and observed in federal government. The two extremes I saw, again, were the extreme hostility on one hand and the extreme politeness on the other. And I realized they seem like polar opposites. And these opposites are really quite prominent in our public life as well. There are people who are, public bullies and they're hostile and they're cruel. And then there are people who are just like, oh, let's just be nice. And they, tone police. Let's just work on, kumbaya. But guess what? I realized that these two extremes, they're actually two sides of the same coin, that the hostile contingent sees other human beings not as human beings with dignity and worth worthy of respect, but as pawns to be steamrolled into submission and silence. And the polite contingent that I experienced and observed in government, they don't see other people as human beings. They see them as pawns to be manipulated and then discarded the moment that they no longer serve their purposes. I'll give you an example. When I was in government, one day a colleague came up to me and said, "Oh, Lexi, you're so brilliant and you look beautiful today. And by the way, I need a favor." I laughed and said, "Okay, what do you need? How can I help you?" And he said, "I'm a little bit behind on this memo, this project. Can you please help me?" And I said, "Yes, happy to help." And I didn't realize that he actually expected me to do the entire project for him, but I had agreed to help him, so I did. And after I finished the memo, I gave him the work product, and he took it and passed it off as his own and got all the credit and glory, went to the meetings that he wasn't even prepared for because he didn't write the memo, didn't do the work. But that wasn't the worst part, that he had taken my work and passed it off as his own. The worst part was that after he got what he wanted from me, gone was the flattery, gone was the pleasantry, gone was the nicety, the obsequious, oh, you look beautiful today and you're so smart. He totally cast me aside, and I felt so used. He got what he needed from me and then didn't need me anymore. And I realized that's what helped me realize that these two extremes, that the extreme hostility, extreme politeness, are two sides of the same dehumanizing coin. And what we need instead is not more niceness, not more politeness, not more etiquette, not more technique. What we need is civility. Civility is the art of human flourishing. It is the fundamental appreciation of the gift of being human in ourselves and others. It is seeing the innate human dignity in other people and saying, I am going to respect you even when we disagree. And that actually respecting someone requires disagreeing with them, or requires maybe hurting their feelings, offending them, telling a hard truth, engaging in robust debate. I don't know. Tanya and Rebecca, I want to thank you for your service, your public service during your years in the Michigan State Legislature, and maybe we even have other public leaders on this call. But you learned this firsthand, that disagreement in a democracy is a feature, not a bug. You can't, it's a naive aspiration to say, oh, we all actually agree. It's a naive goal to say we are all going to perfectly, get along and there's never going to be disagreement again. That is not possible when it comes to human relationships or a democracy. The goal is to disagree with decency, keeping the dignity, the personhood of the other human being front of mind. It's not avoiding disagreement, it's how we disagree, and respecting the dignity of the other human being along the way. And I kind of alluded to this, that there is, I realized in federal government that there is this essential distinction between civility and politeness. Politeness, I realize, is manners, it's etiquette, it's technique, it's external stuff, it's what we do, it's what we say. Whereas civility is an internal disposition of the heart. It's a way of seeing others as our moral equals, worthy of a bare minimum of respect, just by virtue of our shared moral status as members of the human community. And that, again, sometimes actually respecting others requires disagreement. It requires risking hurting someone's feelings, to say, actually, dear, that dress is not the most flattering in the world, and not patronizing one's spouse, or, to say, oh, you look great when you don't actually. That's not love. Anyone who's been in a relationship, a friendship, knows that, honesty and candor is an expression of love, an expression of friendship. And instead today, we have settled for politeness. We've settled for this superficial agreement, this sort of détente, sweeping difference under the rug, which is what politeness does. Politeness comes from the Latin word. Anyone want to raise your hand, chime in, put it in the chat. If you know what the etymological root of politeness is, put it in the chat or raise your hand. I don't know if we're allowing people to chime in verbally.
Yeah,
Rebecca?
absolutely.
Okay.
Please chime in.
Feel free to unmute yourself and or put in the chat if you don't want to talk. Any takers? Jeff, have you finished my book yet? Do you know?
To polish. Hilarious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not polis. I see this all the time, and I hear people say this all the time. They say politeness comes from the Greek polis, which is the Greek word for city. But that's not true. It's incredible how mistakes like that get repeated and ripple out. But yeah, so people say, oh yeah, we need politeness for the city, for democracy, for citizenship. No, actually, the Latin root of politeness is polire, which means to smooth or to polish. And that's what politeness does. It's the technique, the tools, the etiquette, the decorum that polishes over difference. It sweeps it under the rug. It doesn't give us the tools to grapple with difference head on. That is the purview of civility. Anyone want to know? Anyone not named Jeff? Anyone not named Reagan Van Dam want to chime in and guess where the etymology of civility comes from? Okay, Reagan Van Dam, you can chime in if no other takers.
Well, also Latin, civis, the city, or things befitting a citizen.
Civitas, exactly.
Yeah.
Civitas, which is also our etymological root for citizen, city, civilization, and citizenship. This is where our word civility comes from, and that's what civility is. It is the conduct, it is the duty, it is the disposition, the habits, the mores befitting a citizen in the city. And again, especially in a democracy like our own, that requires truth telling, that requires honest, candid disagreement that does not dehumanize along the way. It keeps the dignity of the other front of mind and sees disagreement as a means of an expression of respecting the other. And this is, I think, our challenge of our current moment. This is my hope for our current moment, that how can we reframe our divided moment and say, this divided era doesn't have to spell civil war. It doesn't have to spell scorched earth politics. That this can act as this disagreement. How does it not mutually destroy us, but instead drive us towards something better? How can it be a catalyst for ingenuity, for progress? Iron sharpens iron. How can this bring out? How can disagreement bring forth that which is noble and best in us, and not bring out the worst in us? Which is often what we see on full display in our public leaders now. So much more that we could talk about. I want to leave lots of time for questions. I want to hear from Tanya and Rebecca and Jeff, any questions that they want to get at, any themes. And I want to hear from every one of you on this call. Bring your questions about civility. Happy to talk about what civility looks like around the Thanksgiving dinner table, Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner table. Hot tip: if you want to talk about politics, don't. That's my so feel free to challenge me and ask me about that. So yeah, excited to hear from you. And again, thank you, Tanya, Rebecca, Julie, and whole team for the gracious invitation and your incredible work promoting these ideals of citizenship and civility in the legislature and with citizens. Just so grateful for it and honored to be here and to partner with you.
Well, thank you so much, Lexi. And we'll mimic Jeff, and we'll say we have your book with us today too, and we actually have Jeff Paulette to thank. We at Michiganders for Civic Resilience also do in-person events in addition to these online lunch and learns. And we had an event last spring at the University of Michigan's Ford School of Public Policy, and that's where Jeff first told us about your great book. And Tanya and I both read it. We had our own little mini book club and read it, and we were just so impressed. So when you made time in your schedule to be here with us and our members today, we were so thrilled that this was working out. And obviously, as two folks who spent a very significant part of our adult life in public service and in the public legislature, one of the things, and we are the best of friends, but to your point, we do not agree on many policy issues. There are several things that are really near and dear to each of our hearts we don't agree on. I appreciate the conversation about civility and politeness, but taking that one step further, the work that we're doing now together really is trying to sort of be in this moment, addressing current societal tensions without being partisan, wanting not to be tribal, wanting to be cross-partisan in what we do. And I'll be honest, some people feel like it's impossible right now to disagree with dignity, or might even brand being civil or civility as being naive or ineffective. What advice would you give in the face of that, Lexi?
People, excuse me, sorry. I hear this a lot. People say civility is compromise and it's betrayal of first principles. It's a dilution of integrity and what you believe. And this is what differentiates me from many people in this space, differentiates my message from many people in this space. There are some people that say, we actually don't disagree as much as we think. And if we could just all sit down together and have a conversation, we'll realize that we see eye to eye more than we think, and that these disagreements aren't as serious as we think. And I think that's a little bit and that's exactly what these sort of skeptics of civility are worried about. Many people are skeptical of anyone who invites them for a quote unquote civil dialogue because they think they're going to be brainwashed and hoodwinked and like bludgeoned into agreeing with them. And I think that a lot of these groups, they're a lot well-intended groups, but they kind of downplay the division. Like, well, let's just find common ground, and we actually don't disagree as much as we think. And I think that's a little bit patronizing. That if you think just sitting down and having a conversation with someone, you're going to walk away in perfect agreement. Like we are going to fundamentally disagree on very important topics. We always have, and we always will. Agreement is not the goal of democracy, of this project that I'm honored to help lead, of civic renewal in our communities and our world right now. The question isn't, are we ever going to perfectly agree? It's how are we going to show up amid inevitable disagreement? And so, in fact, I think we have an obligation to ourselves and to this joint project of self-governance that is a democracy to bring our deeply held opinions to the fore and say, this is what I think, and I'm going to tell you why, if you actually want to listen and aren't just going to, shove your talking points, your counter talking points down my throat. But that's too often how these dialogues end up, where it's just, people spouting talking points as opposed to listening with calm, with curiosity, with honest questions. And so that is, that would be my response to people who are concerned, have expressed concerns about civility. They're often operating on a false assumption about what civility is. And part of my project is reclaiming an understanding of that civility doesn't mean you have to dilute your beliefs. It doesn't mean compromise. It doesn't mean you have to sweep difference under the rug. No, it means you have a duty to bring your deeply held opinions to the fore. Not in all times, not in all places, but when the time is right to speak up and not be silenced because you're afraid of someone yelling at you. Like that is inimical. And we see that chilling effect happening now, where people are afraid in workplaces and schools, at home, around their dinner table to even, offer a wisp of an idea that isn't quote unquote, small orthodoxy in whatever that ecosystem is. And that's harmful. That is dehumanizing for people not to have that freedom to bring their ideas to the fore. So I think my answer would be to reputation control, rehabilitate what civility is for people, and show them that it doesn't mean silencing yourself. It means that we have an obligation to ourselves and others to bring our disagreement to the fore.
Thank you for that. Your guide includes a weekly civility challenge and case studies. What one practice should every person, including myself and Rebecca, practice each week in regards to that?
I love that. I'm really a big fan of embodiment and presence. And I travel a lot with my work. I find myself pulled in a lot of directions, but I do work hard to practice what I preach and be present in my community, to know my neighbors, to have friends that live in my immediate vicinity, to be present here. So that would be my practice that I would commend to each of you. Life is so utilitarian and efficient. We're all busy, we're all tired, we're all burnt out by the end of the day. All we want to do is like sit at home, eat dinner and watch Netflix, and like we don't have time, we don't have the energy to give to someone else in terms of conversation or having a dinner party, or even it feels like a chore being with other people. But making the effort to know our neighbors, to know our friend, and to be friends with them, to genuinely like them. Like neighbors are such an interesting um, experiment in pluralism. We don't buy a home based on who our neighbors are. At least most of us don't, right? There are other factors. Where are the schools? How are the roads paved? Which is a question mark always in Indianapolis, where I live. The roads are very fickle, very fickle propositions. Sometimes they don't exist. And and so our neighbors, we just kind of inherit them. And it's our challenge. Can we flourish with these people that we've just kind of inherited? And we live inner city. Jeff's been to our home. We're downtown, aren't we, Jeff? We're in what, at some points in history have been the hood. So we have a very diverse community, and I really relish that diversity, and I like knowing my neighbors. Jane Jacobs, the theorist of community life in New York City, she called it eyes on the street. It's nice to know that you are watching out for your neighbors and that you have people watching out for you, that you can trust the people that are in your immediate vicinity. So there are practical reasons for knowing your neighbors. Is just a very practical baseline place to start. But also, variety is the spice of life. Just inviting people into your home, into your life, to do life with you that maybe you wouldn't choose, but who chose you because of where you live. That there's so much we can learn. There's something we can learn from every single person that we encounter, and being open to that growth and learning and approaching it with curiosity is it's the stuff of the good life.
Well, thank you for that. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and I'm just going to go from the bottom up. My former coworker, Doug Koopman. Doug, did you want to ask your question, or do you want me to read it for you?
Thanks, Tanya. You can just read it.
Okay, perhaps
write
it's
better
my,
than I talk.
all right, Doug says, perhaps it's my bubble, but I'm encouraged to see by how many grassroots initiatives there are around civility, courageous dialogue, etc. And I'm encouraged that it still seems true that politicians are increasingly thinking about and anticipating what Trump post-politics look like. Do you have any suggestions how to speed the push for better disagreement from the grassroots to candidates and office holders?
So it's interesting. Rebecca and Tanya know a little bit about this. I've shared with them a little bit about my work with legislatures, which is rather new. I think when people think about civil discourse, their immediate thought is, oh, our public officials, that's their problem. They need to do better. They need to, regain respect and civic friendship and common decency and be true statesmen. And they're not being statesmen now. And that has not been a priority of my work. Proactively reaching out to, no offense, Tanya, Rebecca, all due respect to your prior lives as public servants, but my focus up until quite recently has been going directly to grassroots leaders. Like, I have been in 135 cities in 5 countries on book tour. And I've gone to communities with like 5,000 people where there's 25 people in a room. We're talking about these ideas. And my vision of social change is that if I can encourage enough people at the grassroots level to say, I have more power than I think as a citizen in this democracy to heal our broken world, to sustain our free and flourishing society, to uphold and strengthen this tapestry of our democracy through little threads, little acts of grace, of kindness, of charity, of civility to my neighbor, my stranger, my friend. That's where social change begins. You don't need all 5,000 people in a town of 5,000 people. You just need, I think it's like, 15% of them maybe to make a cultural difference. And so, all that to say, I did not even write this book, for legislators in mind. Although, if you know a legislator near you, do gift one to them for Christmas. I joke that my book makes a great gift for your best friend or your worst enemy, and sometimes that's the same person these days in these vicious times that we're in. So anyway, I am encouraged though. That hasn't been my priority. My priority has been grassroots leaders, civic leaders, mayors, city council persons, over 100 of which came to Indiana just a few weeks ago. That was the event that Jeff was sharing. I immediately after that he attended here in Indiana and came to, immediately after my book came out, I started getting contacted by these civic leaders saying, "I loved your book. Now what? How do I embody it in my community?" And Carmel, Indiana, a small town just north of where I live in Indianapolis, was one of these communities. The city council was really motivated and they built a whole non-governmental nonprofit around this initiative, as Jeff mentioned, called Project Civility. And together we invited and gathered 100 mayors, city council persons, commissioners, grassroots leaders, journalists, this curated group from across 17 states and Canada around the ideas of my book, that civility is not politeness, agreement is not the goal, but rehumanizing our public life across difference is the goal. And now all of them are going back to their communities and building their own institutions around these ideas. And I have this ambassador program and cohort that I'm working with these leaders, and it's so incredible, so exciting. But the point is, it's only been the last few months that I've had state representatives from and interest from legislatures saying, can you foster some of these difficult conversations, facilitate some of these difficult conversations that we need to have. One of them is Texas. Just last week, we introduced a reading club, a leadership study, we're calling it, inviting legislators to read my book together. And we proposed 3 virtual sessions, 45 minutes, culminating starting in January, culminating in a half-day workshop in person in Austin in February. And the goal over those sessions isn't for me to teach. It's for the legislators to use my book as a canvas from which to think about how they want to do life differently and what are the institutions and procedures, practices that they need to build and create and sustain in order to promote civic friendship and trust that allows democracy to function. And honestly, my goals are modest. My aspirations are modest. We don't have a final number of how many people are going to participate come January in this in the leadership study in Texas. But I think if we have 4 or 6, there is power in that. 4 or 6 committed legislators in the assembly. There is power in that. People saying, I can't control what my colleague is doing and saying on Fox News, but I can control myself. And I'm going to choose to hold myself to a higher standard. I'm going to choose to be better. I'm going to choose to show grace when I'm attacked. I'm going to choose to listen when someone's yelling down my throat. Our example has way more power than we realize. We each have way more power than we realize. And so we're doing something similar in the California state legislature in this spring. Also a very toxic and divided moment in California as well. So there's a lot to lament, also a lot to be hopeful for. And I hope that many of you on this call are feeling encouraged and inspired by that as well. Doug, I, like you, am very encouraged by all of the very multifaceted efforts on this front. I just had some friends and champions and partners in this space in Colorado send me an article about a guy in Colorado who started a nonprofit working on promoting civility and depolarization in veteran communities. I had never thought of veteran communities, but I'm glad someone is out there being like, we need veterans to, champion this cause. I love that. There's, I'm a rising tide floats all boats people. The more the merrier. I'm so grateful as well.
Thank you, Lexi. Jeff, as our esteemed co-host of today's event, do you have a question that you'd like to ask Lexi next?
Well, I don't want to take too much time from the other people here, but you talked about humor at the beginning. I once wrote that one Dave Chappelle is worth 1,000 public intellectuals, because the one thing power doesn't like is being made fun of. Uh, what are
Yeah,
what are the limits of humor? Like, at what point do you think humor crosses a line?
it's a great question. I have a rather permissive and wide view of humor. Exactly what you said, Jeff. Humor has been the tool of choice for oppressed minorities across history to defy authoritarians, to defy powerful people. Um, and this is the argument that I made in this essay, that as we declare war on humor, where we condemn a joke that we don't find funny, as opposed to having a more gracious interpretation of it. We silence a comedian for making a tasteless joke or a joke we don't like, as opposed to just choosing to turn off the television or just not go to their show or something like that. When we feel the need to punish and destroy and cancel, um, that we are threatening the very tenets of a free society. Because to tell a joke, you have to first be able to tell a bad joke. You have to be able to refine your material and get better along the way. And that's feedback for a comedian. It's feedback for an artist. Michelangelo didn't create the Sistine Chapel on his first go. He sketched it, he conceived it, he planned it out, he practiced, countless hours honing his craft in many different artistic outlets and expressions before embarking on this treasure of Western art and Western civilization. That to be creative, to make a joke, we have to fail along the way. And when we condemn bad jokes and we treat it as a moral failing, we're condemning and limiting our capacity for greatness and innovation and flourishing. As a result, we're saying, nope, that was bad. That failure is definitive. Don't try again. You're dead to us. Get out. Goodbye. And so I have a pretty wide and permissive view of humor and our attention. In the attention economy, we hear this phrase attention economy all the time. In the attention economy, we are given even more power and agency. If you are offended by a joke, you have the freedom to not patronize that comedian or that book or creator or writer. And when it comes to my circumstance, where people told me, and it made me so sad, that they read my joke, didn't think it was funny, and they wrote to me and said, I couldn't finish reading the book. I didn't want to hear another thing that you had to say because you said this one thing, because you said you didn't want to hear from people who disagreed with you. And that made me so sad. And that, we can talk about, someone asked me about unbundling people. How do we unbundle books? How do we unbundle people? See the part and light of the whole. Like, it made me sad that people wanted to reduce my whole 400-page book. I know it's way too long. I'm sorry, everyone, for such a long book. But reduce it to one sentence, right? Literally just one sentence that I added in there just to try and lighten the mood that people didn't, took amiss. And I'm sorry for that. In other iterations, I will probably remove the joke or maybe tell this story about the misplaced joke and the forgotten laugh. I don't know. I haven't decided yet for future versions of my book. But, to your question, Jeff, about the limits of humor, I think that our tolerance for humor is a proxy for the freedom in our society. And the more that we scrutinize and limit and place boxes around what we joke about and how we're willing to fail, how tolerant are we of failure, that's a proxy for our freedom and our flourishing.
Thank you. From our Michiganders for Civic Resilience team today, we're also joined by our state coordinator, Julia Pulver. So she's been running all the tech for us today, and we appreciate her. And she's going to ask some of the questions from the chat so we can try to get as many in before we hit time today. So Julia?
Absolutely, thank you. So I'm just going to kind of start at the top and go down and summarize. So Brenda asks, as she's working on model legislation about gun safety, she's wondering if you've had any experiences that you could share about discussing issues that are, hot button issues like guns and safety. How do you do that from a civility standpoint?
A great question. And I will tell you what not to do. I think too often people set themselves up for failure talking about these hot button issues by thinking it's just a matter of tone or saying the right things or not saying the right things. And actually, my advice, it's kind of counterintuitive, would be in order to talk about hot button issues like gun control or gun policy, we have to start by not talking about them at all. We have to, I think, in order to talk about really sensitive topics like, abortion, for example. I don't think going in with your arguments and your position right away is the right move. I think it's first sitting down to a meal and talking about everything else under the sun, building friendship, building a sense of trust and basic affection, where you see the other person not in terms of they're just pro-life, they are just pro-choice, they're a gun crazy person, or they're trying to take away my guns, like where you reduce them. This is what happens. You start going down these you start having these conversations, and too often, as we've talked about already, people we have these mental shortcuts where we devolve immediately into our talking points. And that's not helpful or productive. And I think we have to first kind of expand our hearts and our souls and our lives and to have the capacity to have these conversations, like zoom out. I want you to see the fullness of who I am first. I want to see the fullness of who you are first. You're not just pro-life. You're not just pro-choice. And then after we have that basic baseline of trust, then maybe we can, foray into those issues. But I mean, this is even the premise of the work that I'm doing with legislators and these state legislators across the country, Texas, California, and others, where it's like, in order to have these debates on the floor with respect and integrity to self and our constituents, we first have to not have them. We first have to sit down and be friends. Shakespeare said it well. He said, "Do as adversaries do in law, but then sit and eat and drink as friends." And I love that. I think that, we're not feasting together. We're not dining together. We're not living together. Our leaders aren't, and we aren't. There's a lot of literature about how leading parallel lives is inimical to civic friendship and trust, these things that grease the wheels of a democracy. And so it sounds kind of counterintuitive. How do we get state legislators? How do we get anyone to talk about these hot button issues? We have to first start by not talking about them and recovering this baseline of trust and friendship. If we just go into the conversation, guns ablazing with, sorry, no pun, no joke intended, but without, and maybe we're prepared with a sort of like, techniques, listen open-mindedly, and maybe we're a little bit prepared, but that's not going to be sustainable. That's not going to get us through a conversation in the way that we need to actually make progress and make decisions. I love this line from David Hume. He was a mainstay figure of the Scottish Enlightenment. He said, "Truth springs from argument amongst friends." And again, argument is a feature, not a bug of a democracy. But for argument to be productive, it needs to happen amongst friends. And we're just not friends anymore. And I'd like to support people of all walks of life. I'm doing work in schools. I have the curriculum and children's book I'm working on. I have the workbook for HR managers and for people who want this in their workplace. Like I want to help people recover a baseline of friendship that will help us do life together across difference better.
That's great. Okay, Cornelia asks what you would do now if you were asked to help on a report again. What if somebody finds themselves in that position? What would your advice be if put in that situation?
It's a great question. I've actually never been asked that question before. And that's saying a lot because I've been asked a lot of questions over the years. I really appreciate that kind of counterfactual. I think my error going into government was being naive. I saw the world through rose-tinted spectacles. And what government did to me was like show me the world that was, human beings as they are, not how I wished they were. And that was hard for me to grapple with. Like, oh, there are people in the world that are willing to take and not give. And there are people in the world that are going to use and cast aside. And that was hurtful. That was disillusioning. So I had, my idealism, my idealistic bubble burst. And so if someone, put me in that situation now, I think I would have more tempered expectations of what to expect of them. Like what I wouldn't think that, of course, I do the work, I get the credit. I wouldn't think that, of course, this person thinks I'm as beautiful as and wonderful and smart as he thinks I am. I would say, the world is full of fallen people. I love how Blaise Pascal put it. Blaise Pascal is my favorite one of my favorite thinkers, intellectuals. He's a polymath, scientist, inventor of the first calculator. He was skeptical of he lived during the French Enlightenment, kind of at the beginning of it, but he was very skeptical of the French Enlightenment and its faith in reason and science and rationality. He said of René Descartes, of course, the father of the French Enlightenment, Descartes, you are useless and uncertain. He was not a fan of scientific rationalism, but he says this very insightful observation about the human condition. He says, the human condition is defined by the greatness and wretchedness of man. Greatness and wretchedness. That's what it means to be human. We are capable of unbelievable beauty and ingenuity and altruism, of good in the world. But we are also capable of untold evil and harm to both ourselves and to others. And this is a point I make in my book, and I try and make it as often as possible. That yes, I start my book about why I wrote a book on civility because I tell, about my experience in government that, but I don't want to unduly malign government. There are good people in government. There are bad people in government. There are good people in education. There are bad people in education. But even within that, there's good and bad in each of us as well. Neither one of us are monoliths, either purely good and purely bad. There's a line from a story I tell in my book about the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And the story by Robert Louis Stevenson goes that Dr. Jekyll is prominent, prestigious, beloved in Edinburgh, a physician in Scotland, but he has these base impulses that he can't quite shake. And so he devises, he in his basement laboratory, devises this potion that he drinks, and it transforms him into the bestial, base Mr. Hyde that goes out, wreaks havoc, vandalizes, hurts people, kills people at night. And he thinks he's solved a perfect plan. He can keep his pristine reputation as Dr. Jekyll by day, and then by night he can do whatever he wants and get away from it scot-free. But then he realizes something strange begins to happen. He soon starts to spontaneously transform into Mr. Hyde without drinking the potion, and ultimately he permanently becomes Mr. Hyde, who kills him. and Dr. Jekyll is no more. And in his letter right before Mr. Hyde kills him, he said, it cannot be said that I was either purely Hyde or purely Jekyll. I was not neither purely friend nor fiend. He said I was irrevocably both. Like we are both a little bit good and a little bit bad. And I love this idea of this story. It's often attributed to a Cherokee, fable, but we don't know where it came from, but it's just a lovely story where a grandfather is talking to his son. He says, there are two wolves within every one of us. There's one good wolf, one bad wolf. One good wolf who is noble, just, caring, kind. And the bad wolf who is cruel, malicious, deceitful, and dehumanizing. And these wolves are at war within you, grandson, every moment of every day. And the grandson looks on wide-eyed and says, Grandfather, which wolf will win? And the grandfather says, do you know, Julia? Go ahead.
The one that you feed.
Whichever wolf you feed. And how do we feed our inner wolves? We feed them with our time, our attention, our habits, how we act each day in ways great and small. And that is why I think that this conversation about civility in public life is incomplete if we only focus on the parts of our lives that are public. It's what we do in private, the things that either humanize us, cultivate our humanity, or debase us. The small acts of kindness towards others that people will never see, or the small acts of cruelty that people will never see. Those form us. Those make us who we are in private and in public. And that's very much my theory of social change, healing society through healing self, and starting with the ways small, right before us, right now.
Lexi, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful presentation, and we look forward to hearing more and actually talking amongst ourselves about whether we might be able to put your leadership forum, the book club for legislators, into effect maybe here in our home state. Again, her book, The Soul of Civility, Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves, is a wonderful read, and I think it does make good holiday gifts, so that's a great idea, Lexi. We absolutely want to thank you for your time, Jeff Paulette, director of the Ford Leadership Forum at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. Thank you so much for being our co-host for this series and so many wonderful events that we do. As we alluded to, we also do at Michiganders for Civic Resilience in-person events. We're going to preview for those of you who are on our list. There's some very exciting things happening in Q1 next year. So pay attention to your email or to your socials. If you're not yet signed up for our email list, we do just a weekly newsletter to try to keep folks updated on the kinds of events that are happening and important and interesting articles that we come across that we think are important in elevating this topic. We are also on just about every social media platform known to man. So whether you're a LinkedIn person, an X person, a Facebook person, a Threads person, a Blue Sky person, you can find us there. And we just appreciate so much the good attention, the good questions, the discussion today. And we hope to see you all again at a future Michiganders for Civic Resilience event as we go forward.
Yes. Thank you all for a little bit of your time today. And if you get a chance to read the copy of the book, I'd love to gift you the free reading guide. And I think if you're okay, Tanya and Rebecca sharing the contact list, I'd love to stay in touch with people.
Yes, if it's okay with everyone on the call, we will share that information. If you do have a problem with it, just
opt out. Yeah.
Opt out. Otherwise, we'll assume that you opted in, and we'll share that with Lexi.
Perfect. Thank you all. Such a joy to be with you, and happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas. Can we say that yet? I think so.
Merry Christmas.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Holidays, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Jeff.
Bye.